Hello, everyone. Oliver Studd here, founder of Valhalla Network. On the call today, we have Mark Jolly, who's our head of compliance, who has had over 20 years of experience in, everything across the board, really, compliance, legal, risk, investments, and was a former deputy head of compliance at Ali United Bank. We've got Audie Sheridan, who's our CTO. He himself, 40 years of development experience, 10 of them managing teams. And he likes to say that he goes where there's smoke, which is always good. And he likes being under pressure. So we try and give as much pressure as possible at Valhalla Network. And Mark Mottershead, who's a founder of Mule Media, himself has over 20 years of experience in direct response marketing. And he's our VP of marketing at Valhalla Network. So thanks for joining today. This session is really to give some insight into the team, our experience, and how we are going to build this banking system that will exist to serve the people, serve small businesses, and building a better banking system that overall should lead to sustainable economic growth locally. So to kick it off, I wanted to really get into the tech to start with, Audie, and with you and your experience. You've previously helped build a DAO as well, Vita DAO. So perhaps it'd be useful for you to give some insight into what you've been up to over those sort of last 40 years, some insight into who Audie Sheridan is, and your experience with Vita DAO and everything you did there, and how you're going to use it to sort of help build a Valhalla network into what it's going to be.
Hello, everyone. This is Audie. I started coding when I was some 8 years old. I think this was 1983 or so, and I've been doing it ever since. I didn't pick it up professionally until after I mustered out of the U.S. Marine Corps, and did a few years of odd jobs, but finally decided to do professional coding. Picked that up, and I was in the Nashville area in Tennessee, and I worked in various healthcare and engineering firms, most lately in Schneider Electric, before I decided to go full time in doing consulting on my own. And during that, I was working in Web3. During the last couple of years, I was working in Web3, getting really involved. And one of the DAOs that I really fell in love with was Vita DAO, and I joined, and I was so into it that I just started to help out, and in any way that I could. And that's one of the things that's really great about the Web3 space, is that it's open to people who are willing to do the work. And I jumped in, and I was actually kind of surprised to become sort of a founding member of Vita DAO, because I just got in there and started to help them deliver. And that was with respect to their smart contracts, their DApp, their launching their token, and all that stuff. I was just there right there at the beginning when they needed me, and I helped them launch. Watched that process, and I participated in the DAO for a good long period as a founding member. Ultimately, I ended up backing out of that DAO because I had other commitments, but it was a lot of fun and a really great experience. And that's what I hope to have for everyone else that's participating in Valhalla. A DAO is really cool in that it's a cooperative environment. We have to build it so that it's really easy to interact with, and that was one of the things that I learned from Vita DAO, is that it's super easy to set DAOs up to be confusing, hard to manage, or requiring so much consensus that they're very slow to operate. And having participated in several DAOs, including Vita DAO, I'm bringing that experience to Valhalla to make sure that for all of our holders, it's very easy to participate, and that we provide as much information as possible, and give tools that are at your fingertips, like mobile apps and those kind of things, to make sure that you don't have to stretch yourself to remember to participate. And that's one of the guiding principles I'm bringing to Valhalla.
Audie, this is awesome. I'm excited as well when listening to some of your ideas recently and what we've been discussing. I am excited to see it be built and how easy it's going to be for token holders to be able to properly govern the system. Your experience at Vita DAO, and funnily enough, when you joined Valhalla Network right at the start, actually, you were only sort of a couple of months after after the idea was sort of formulated, you jumped on board and joined the team, which was fantastic. And you started off as sort of lead tech consultant, working with Roman, who was our previous CTO, who did a great job last year at planning things out, looking at the MVP and what we need to build, the security elements as well, and working very closely with you on that. And now you're in the CTO role as building it and focusing on actually, okay, let's implement this, let's get things up and running, which is sort of your wheelhouse, which is you're brilliant at that. Previously, before Vita Dalvo, what have you been up to for the last 40 years? That's what I really want to get into. Who Audi is? You're from America. You live in Tennessee. I don't even know if you're from Tennessee originally. um, yeah, tell us more about actually your life before crypto and before you got into it, and then it'd be useful to go into a little bit about sort of the challenges of DAOs and everything like that. And we've been discussing about regarding the ease of proposals, but yeah.
Sure. So I bounced around as a kid. I moved a lot. It was just something my father was moving around a lot, and so I did. Originally, I'm from Baltimore. I lived in Indiana and lived in South Carolina. So I've kind of lived in a variety of places on the more eastern side of the United States. And then when I joined the Marine Corps, I was stationed in Hawaii for several years, where I learned to sail, scuba dive, and fell in love with the ocean.
Was that for work? Apparently, learning to scuba dive and sail.
No, that was all recreational. It was something.
Oh,
It
I
was
see.
fun.
Okay.
It was something fun to do. I was in the Marine Corps. In the Marine Corps, I did interestingly electro-optical ordnance repair, which is basically a fancy way of saying fixing sights, night vision goggles, and those kind of things. But I worked with an anti-tank weapon platoon, and there's not much call for that when you get out of the Marine Corps. And so when I got out, I started to look for work and found work as a mechanic, like an automotive mechanic, for a few years. I've had a variety of careers. I did some work as a mechanic for several years. I worked in manufacturing for several years. But then when it got down to where my wife was pregnant and it was time to really settle in, I started looking for career opportunities that made more money and were more stable, and something that could really help me support my children.
And looking for something more stable, is that why you chose crypto? Because that is something that crypto is known for, isn't it?
No. This was in the early 2000s, before the markets fell apart and before everything went haywire. But I was working on a charitable foundation that builds houses in the U.S. called Habitat for Humanity, and I was standing on a roof talking to somebody, and it happened to be a technical recruiter, and he told me, if you learn this language, you can get a job in no time in Nashville. So when my daughter was born, I stayed home with her for a little while and taught myself that stack of technology, and started applying for a job as soon as I felt confident, and I had a job within a month. So he was right. There was no problem getting a job. It was just a little bit of competence, and and then I was off to the races. And ever since my daughter was born, I've been a professional coder. She's in college now, and I worked my way up from being the frontline guy, the guy that just took the jobs off the line and did the work, to being a team lead, to being a manager. And I worked for Schneider Electric for many years as a manager. I always like to keep my coding skills sharp, though, because that's kind of what I enjoy. And the Schneider Electric career ended up taking me farther away from the technical side. It was becoming more corporate and political, and that, like, the kind of stuff that I'm not that interested in. So I decided pretty late in my career to go full-time consulting. And during all of this time, I was starting to settle in with Web3 and working with Vita DAO and a few other DAOs and some other Web3 projects. And I started to be able to support myself in that way. So I decided to go whole hog and started my consulting business. I now have LLC, and then very, very soon after that, this all started in like 2021, but it was in November, I think, of 2021 that I met, or no, it was October of 2021 that I met Oliver in Lisbon at a conference, and he and Roman and the team and I just hit it off, and we started hanging out that week, and it's been ever since. I've been just really into this Valhalla Network idea because it's just so mission aligned with what I want to do. I want to do good things with crypto, and I think this is just one of the best things we can do is help stabilize communities and support small and medium enterprises.
Yeah, Audie, you're sort of like a perfect guy for us to bump into and meet. I remember it at the it was at the after party that we weren't even supposed to get into, which was quite funny.
Yeah.
The after party for the DAO conference where we got in just by sharing ink, sharing the stamp from person to person to get into the after party. But when we were in there, we saw you, and I remember walking up and listening to you and Rome talking away and talking about technical stuff that I had no idea what you're on about. And after a couple of minutes, I sort of whispered to Rome and said, is this guy, is he worth talking to? Is he quite clever? Is he someone that, knows what we're talking about, wants to get involved? And Roman was like, yeah, he knows his stuff. Really, we want to keep talking to this guy, which was quite funny. But then you quickly picked up on what we were doing. Really,
Have we lost Oliver?
Pardon? We say, Mark?
Or is it just me?
Have you lost me?
I could hear him the whole time.
Oh, Mark, yeah, I think you might have lost me, but yeah. So I was saying that very quickly on, you picked up on what we're doing and the need for it. I remember within the first week of us talking, you were already going through the Prince of the Yen, watching the Prince of the Yen documentary on YouTube about our chairman, Professor Richard Werner. He's the author of a Japanese #1 bestseller that the documentary is based on. So I remember you picking up on that quickly, looking at Richard's articles and blogs that he's writing, and wanted to get involved and help with it any way you could. And very quickly, you became an integral part of the team. You were a key member of the white paper, the original white paper we were writing, and working with us on that. You were never distant from a project, which was great, and it was obviously something very close to your heart, which I liked. So while you were doing that, you were obviously still building and part-time you were working with us and part-time you're building Vita DAO. Perhaps it's worth you giving some insight into your experience there, what your role was, and what you learned, and how you're going to apply that now to Valhalla Network, and then touching back onto those, the challenges you see with DAOs and where you see DAOs growing in the future.
Yeah, sure. So yes, I was working with Vita DAO when we met. That's why I was in Lisbon. The work I did with Vita DAO was very similar to how I came on board here, which is I really just started reading the white paper and got really I just got excited about the whole project, and it is a project worth checking out. It's a project around longevity and funding longevity projects. A little hobby of mine, something that I've read about for decades, but the cool thing about the DAO is I jumped in and I started helping them with their white paper, because as soon as I read it, I realized that there was not a professional writer. There wasn't somebody who was really working at making that thing quality. And so the ideas were solid. Everything was cool about it, but I wanted to make it professional. So I jumped in and turned it into a LaTeX document and started to do some editing, and because of that, I got invited to more and more of the founders' meetings, because when we talked, they liked my idea. So I started to lean in, and they found out I had some technical experience and I knew what I was doing with all that, and they started just to ask me to help out. And when they did that, I leaned in, and there was plenty to do. They were running up to a launch. I started with them in like April of 2021. They were running up to a launch, and because they were running up to that launch, there was just a mountain of work and not enough people. So there was plenty of places for me to lean in and help out. I started helping manage consulting firms that were doing contracts. I helped fill those contracts out so that the DApps would actually work, and then started to take over on the development of those DApps just to deliver everything. And because I was technically involved and I knew where all the contracts were and all the just everything about the place, I just started to be the guy that knew where everything was and how it all worked. I started doing a bunch of reporting, like doing analytics and those kind of things. And it's just, it was a natural fit for me. I ended up working, I think I was working full time at the time. I was considering going full time consulting, but I hadn't quite done it yet. So I was working basically 2 full-time jobs and just enjoying it. It was so much fun. And once we got past the launch, then it became actually managing a DAO, which meant writing governance and, following up with people and keeping the community alive. And this all taught me so much because this was the first DAO that I had been a part of. And I was involved in other DAOs and participated in other DAOs along the way, but this was the first one. And it was where I kind of fell in love with the idea. And there's, of course, that experience I'm bringing to Valhalla Network. But the key learning I had from there, like I mentioned earlier, is just there's a distance between what a DAO can do and what needs to be done in the real world. And not everything can be governed because governance is slow. And because governance is slow, you have to craft what you govern to make sure that those people who are acting on your behalf in the DAO on the DAO's behalf are doing so with guidance and governed guidance. And that's a very hard problem to solve because there's just so much that has to be done. And that's one of the key values I think that Valhalla Network is going to have. We're going to launch with bylaws instead of launching with the expectation of governing bylaws into place. Of course, everything will be subject to governance, but because of that one simple thing, and the fact that we're implementing a foundation that will be able to work in the real world in real time, but under DAO governance and under fiduciary responsibility to the DAO. That's the way I think DAOs can move forward in the future. Is that a DAO governance is good for timelines of a week or two, and maybe even longer, like months or years, strategic type planning, those kind of things. But when it comes to the day-to-day, DAOs are you have to be careful to make sure DAOs are legitimately doing what they should be in the micro, because it's very easy to just kind of blanket off, allow certain members to do what they want with a certain limit of funds or a limit of authority or whatever. And that's the sort of thing we want to have closely governed in Valhalla DAO, because this is important stuff. We want to be able to operate legally, responsibly, and in real time because we have to. But we also want the governance to manage how all of that occurs. And that's that one realization through working with the DAOs that I've worked with is probably the most valuable thing I bring to Valhalla, is just making sure that we have some sort of control system that is effective at the same time as responsive.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, that makes sense. Like I said earlier as well, discussing it with you, it's very clear what we're trying to do here with the proposals and governance, and how we've got the executive arm of the foundation that will do the day-to-day. Having to do the day-to-day tasks that would be too much for governance and for the DAO to try and handle, because again, DAO governance is tends to be slow. But then you've got the DAO governance on top of that, which sets, oversees and sets the bylaws, amends them if they need to be amended, and effectively watches what's happening, and then pushes the foundation into it steers it in the direction it wants it to go. And then the executive function actually delivers on it and delivers them and does as the DAO wants it to. That's really good.
With a feedback mechanism as well. So it's not just it's not just a one-way power shift. It's not like the DAO is giving power away. The DAO is enhancing its own power by giving itself a team of operators that are taking care of business for it, but are responsible to and beholden to the DAO in a way that will involve reporting and the back and forth that would of course happen in those cases. Because every DAO comes with its challenges. There's always, this is the same with any work environment that you end up in. I worked in corporate for decades, and there's always a power struggle. There's always disagreements. There's always multiple strategic directions that you could go, but you only have resources for one, right? There's something like that. Like there's always that level of conflict, and that's something a DAO is good at, is bringing in enough people to have a good handle on what that choice is and making an informed decision. That's something that is good when you have involved users or holders, and that's one of the other insights that I bring from Valhalla is you have to have a pace of governance that is sustainable and something that doesn't create voter exhaustion, but you also need to make sure that you're not overdoing it where it's or you don't want it to go either way. You don't want it to be like there's a governance thing that you have to vote on every day, and you don't want it to be like there's only one every quarter, because then you lose their attention. So you have to, it's almost like the DAO, part of the DAO's responsibility is selling its own importance to its members all the time. And a big part of that is proposals and making sure that their governance is meaningful and there is enough of it that people can stay informed if they stay involved. And we of course have to incentivize that, but there's, go ahead.
That incentives as well, that's the important point as well for the DAO. It's got to be for its members to actually be actively participating and governing and keeping the attention span. Not only does it have to be an important mission and something that they get behind and actually support and want to see come to fruition. So that's the first thing. So they actually want to be involved and part of something, because ultimately they are, the members are what makes the project what it is. Without the members, there is no project. So they have to want to be part of it. The second thing is, like you said, you want the governance to be meaningful so that they know what they're doing is actually important and pushes the mission forward. And then the third thing is we need to then reward the users for actively participating, which is where the reward structure comes in, whereby we have this mechanism in place whereby we can give tokens and reward tokens to individual members who are actively participating in governance, and it's not going to be staking that you see in many other projects. This is token rewards, where users will lock in tokens for a set period of time, and then based on how much governing and how much governance they're actually participating in dictates what rewards they get from the foundation, which of course the DAO themselves vote on that as well. They govern the whole thing, so they vote on how those rewards will work. So it's a very interesting technical solution that we're building, and I'm certainly excited to see it get rolled out and built out further this year and then rolling out next year. Thanks for that, Audie. The two Marks. Let's start with Mark Mottershead. Let's go into something not so heavy for now, because Mr. Jolly is all into compliance, and I have some great questions for him, but it's going to be much more attention span needed to talk about Mika and stuff.
So I'm the light entertainment, that's the heavy sandwich here.
Whereas you're the light entertainment, Mr. Mark Mottershead. But no, let's go into your background in marketing and more traditional marketing. And what I want to sort of understand is, from your perspective, coming into it from digital marketing and direct response, how you are feeling in sort of navigating the waters of Valhalla Network and Web3 and the challenges you're facing to date. Now, we obviously have a lot of conversations. We discuss how we're trying to build out the marketing team, how we're trying to adapt it. We've got specific challenges this year and what we want to try and face. But we're in a bear market. It's not an easy time to be marketing. It's not an easy time to be growing a community. It's not an easy time for anyone, because you've got so many people with who are in difficult positions or aren't able to move positions, aren't able to actually join in the community as much as they'd like to, because they're currently stuck while the market is down. So, Mark, what's your background before Valhalla Network? Give some insight into who you are.
How far do you want me to go back on this one?
Not too far, but you're in Germany now. You see the Sparkassen. I know I never pronounce it correctly. You see the German community banks, and you see the success that they have in Germany. When did you move to Germany? Why did you move to Germany? That's what I want to know as well. Why did you choose Germany? Was it love? Is that what drove you to Germany?
That was the reason. I met my partner in 2005, and I moved over here in 2006. So I've been here for 17 years now, and in many ways, Germany is not so different from the UK, just a bit tidier and more efficient, as you can imagine. And regards the banks, I guess I could liken them, so as people can understand, to more like franchises. There is a federal involvement and how they are regulated and what they're bound to do under the framework that they operate, but they are very much a center for the particular area. So my local Sparkasse is Sparkasse Aachen, which covers quite a wide area. So it goes, the next nearest one would be perhaps Düren or the Jülich, and they are maybe, I don't know, I'm guessing 40-50 kilometers away. Maybe less than that. But you can see that it covers quite a wide area when you have that sort of radius. But you will then have lots of little branches. So Sparkasse Aachen has in Aachen itself maybe 3 or 4 branches. And then each little satellite town around the city will have them. And they will each have staff that will obviously dealing with retail customers, but also with small businesses. And the larger businesses in the area will probably refer to the central branch in Aachen itself. But this will then be repeated in the satellite branches around the central hub. And so this operates as I say, like a franchise. But so the Sparkasse branding is common across all Sparkasse throughout Deutschland, throughout Germany. But obviously the satellite branches will then kind of report into their city hub. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and each branch only deals with small businesses in their local area, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. They're not casino banks in any way. And in fact, there was a report came out a couple of weeks ago in our local paper about how the Sparkasse Aachen had performed, and it was really quite interesting. I can't recall the details off my top of my head, but they clearly are very profitable.
Yeah, well, I say this so often as well, because it's so important that in that 2008 crisis, when banks were all struggling and you required taxpayer bailout, not one German community bank required taxpayer bailout, which is just phenomenal, really. People always talk about the risks of small businesses and the risk of community banks, but it's because that's what they're being told, or that's what they just naively believe is why the big banks aren't going near small businesses. It's nothing to do with the risk. It's about, they just want more money, they want more profits, and it's easier for them to give out one huge loan than it is to give out lots of small loans. But actually, small business lending is not risky, it's the opposite, and it's productive, and it means that in times of crisis, it's not the community banks that are struggling, and it's not them who've caused the crisis. So Mark, what were you doing before Valhalla Network then? I understand you're more the traditional marketing background. This is your first time into the Web3 space.
Yeah, I was involved in crypto only as a punter for about 3 years before I joined. Kind of familiar with the crypto world, but not really the more technical aspects of Web3 and DAOs and so forth. As far as marketing goes, I've been involved since about 2006, I would suggest, something like that. And when one thinks of traditional marketing, one might think of branding. So advertising by Coca-Cola or McDonald's or whatever. The type of marketing I've been involved in is known as direct response. So it's those kind of ads that you used to see in newspapers and magazines, and you still do, but also online. When you see ads online, they are looking for a direct response. hence the name. And so the importance of copywriting is tremendous. And the difference I've seen, well, I always liken the marketing in crypto and the Web3 world to be more like the dot-com bust. So in the days leading up to the dot-com bust, 1998, 99, 2000, people used to talk about eyeballs. Ah, yes, we got eyeballs on our website. And of course, that's not a meaningful measurement. And Warren Buffett was very clear that, this is going to go end badly, and indeed it did. And it kind of seems the same to me in the Web3 crypto world, as people talk about impressions, and but that's not a measurable statistic. It doesn't put money in the bank. What's important is subscribers to a certain extent, followers in the case of Twitter, and then ultimately getting them involved in the project and in the community.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, Mark. Definitely. So, this is a very different space for you, though, Web3 in general, in terms of and it is very different for me as well. And a lot of it I don't appeal to, it doesn't appeal to me even. A lot of the terminology that's used, and I'm having to mix into it. And I think a lot of people in Web3 as well probably don't always like all the terminology that's used. Do you think it's going to stay, or do you think the marketing will naturally, across the board, will become more, let's say, sophisticated once the regulators keep stepping in? There's more regulations coming in this year. The FCA have announced some regulations concerning marketing in crypto that are coming out later this year. Do you think as the space matures, marketing will also change? And I like the community marketing. I'm not saying get rid of that. Like eToro and stuff is doing a lot of that as well now, and more fun marketing. That's great. It's just in general, all this shilling of projects and community members just being quite aggressive out there and shilling the projects that they like and trying to get the price of a token, all this to boom. Do you think that sort of marketing is going to reduce? And and that will ultimately go, or do you think it's going to stay?
It has to go. At the end of the day, it's all about the offer. It doesn't matter whether you're selling shoes or educational material or books. It's the offer. And if you're offering, or a service, in fact, and if you're offering a good service and you can stand by it, then you don't need to lie about it and chill it up. People will say, okay, well, this looks value for money, I'm in. Well, as I say, whether it's shoes or books or services. And it's going to be the same for crypto projects.
Yeah, but in this case, is it that you're just shilling something that you're not involved in? Because don't forget, the people who are shilling, the people who are the ones promoting their coin stuff, they're part of the community. So they're actually promoting the community, which is something. It is a product. Promoting the community to people to get more community members in. So I don't know if it will. Will that be erased? Because ultimately, Web3 is very different, and especially DAOs. In our case, like in a lot of cases, the community means everything, and the token holders mean everything.
Those are products in and of themselves, right? It's not just pump and dump.
Okay, so I understand the pump and dump element will be erased, but I still think you'll get that huge community, because you need it and you want it, the community driving a lot of the marketing as well, and promoting the project and getting involved in what the project is doing, because ultimately they are part of a project. They govern the project. Sure. They are part of how it grows.
Yeah, I don't equate shilling with community. Those two things aren't the same in my mind, for sure. And certainly even in the direct response kind of media world that I come, advertising media world, there is a move more towards communities. So there's new platforms being set up, and people are flooding into the communities because they appreciate the community. Now, these communities might be based on programs, teaching programs. So people are paying to be a member and then taking part, but they are going towards a content strategy, driving people into communities, and then maybe upselling them. All I'm saying is that communities in the marketing world are a coming thing. So it does very much align with what we're doing.
Okay, great. No, I understand that. And Mark, your involvement in the project as well has been quite a funny entrance. Slightly different to Audi's entrance. We didn't meet you at an event. It was very different. I set up Professor Richard Werner's Telegram channel, and you've always had an interest in macroeconomics as well in the financial space. So you've been following Richard for many years, I understand, and a few years, I think, and a fan of his work. So you joined the space, and then you saw, if I'm not mistaken, you saw me mention something in there. You saw me discussing with Richard maybe about Valhalla Network, and that's when you then dropped me a message basically saying, "Look, this is what I do. Can I offer my services in any way to help you guys out?"
No, it was funnier than that, really. Of course, I didn't know that you were behind his Telegram channel at the time. And you posted, "We're looking for a marketing intern." And I wrote and said something like, "Be a little too old to be an intern, but would love to have a chat with you anyway." And that's how it started.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, we're still deciding on whether the age and whether you're too old to be an intern. I'm not sure about that yet.
Yeah, let me know when you decided.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, thanks so much, Mark. Now, keeping with the time, Mr. Jolly, I wanted to get into your background as well, because you've got a lot of experience in the compliance space. Now, Web3 is very different space to work in compared to the traditional financial, especially the banking space. And, what we're doing itself is so strange. We're combining the most regulated industry there is in the world with the least regulated industry there is. And you've had over 20 years experience in compliance and risk and legal and stuff like that. You're coming from, deputy head of compliance at an established bank, and coming into Valhalla Network as head of compliance and understanding and getting your head into the regulatory space here to make sure we abide by all current regulations, but also what we're going to do is going to abide by future regulations. But even more, one further than that, what you're looking at is the banking regulations and saying, also, what we're doing, is it going to be accepted by the banking regulators? Which is even, that's even stranger to consider that. So perhaps it's worthwhile, before we get into MiCA, which is the new regulations that are coming into force. They've just been passed by the EU. So they're coming into force sort of, I think, next year, or they're going to be, or end of this year. Mark, you can be more specific on that. But perhaps it's worth quickly going into your background before you joined Valhalla Network.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm in the process of going for a move today, so been quite chaotic. But yeah, my background, I started in 1999, worked for a whole array of banks, including BlackRock, Allianz Global Investors, Barclays. So traditional banking, it was my forte. That there's a whole array of tasks, from AML, KYC checks, distribution compliance, liaising with marketing, and making sure that we could sell our products to an array of different jurisdictions, and making sure we fulfilled the regulatory criteria set by the local regulator. So yeah, that is my background. But as you say, MiCA is a game changer, and it's very similar somewhat to what MiFID done for the industry. So hopefully, my background experience will hold us in good stead, because I've gone through this. I've gone through the regulatory applications in the past, making sure that we adhere to directives. So my experience with MiFID will hold us in good stead for when we roll out MiCA, which is a landmark, once in a generation regulation. It's gonna bring a lot of trust to the community, because it's going to create more of a level playing field too. So I'm excited by MiCA, because crypto sometimes gets a bad name, and I think that with the advent of MiCA, it will allow practitioners like ours to sell our products and have that element of trust that their investors will be protected when they invest in Valhalla.
Yeah, Mark, your position as well in the company, it's much more than just, the compliance officer. You're also working on the banking application with Borja, who is currently enjoying his time on holiday at the moment. So you're working on the actual banking regulations as well in Liechtenstein, which obviously means having to look at the whole banking regulations across the EEA and what's being applied to what's being applied to us. For your work in that space, do you think, what we've done already, we're doing KYC, we're doing AML, we have to do it on all money coming in because of the fact that the money's being used to start up a bank. So we have to know our customers. If that's the KYC, we have to know who our investors are, where the money's coming from to make sure it's not dodgy. Do you see what's your sort of views on the banking environment we're going into and how it's going to perceive crypto and what we're doing with the foundation? What's your sort of preliminary thoughts?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions there. As you say, we're going into Liechtenstein. FMA is the regulator, and Liechtenstein is very the big advocates of the crypto world. So I know that was a big driver in as to why we chose Liechtenstein. They were one of the first progressive jurisdictions that brought in TVTG, which is the Blockchain Act. So there was a even though they're a small country, not only were they at the forefront of new regulations coming in, but also it gives us access to the wider European Union. So the 27 countries, it allows Valhalla to, once we acquire the license in Liechtenstein, which is we're expected to happen by early 2024, that will allow us to market the Valhalla token to all 27 member states. But to go back to your question, the FMA banking application itself, we've made a really good start. We've got a legal counsel involved as well. They've reviewed our banking application, our business model, and they've given us a good comfort and assurance by reviewing it and giving us a positive sign. So what we'll be doing imminently is we'll be meeting with the FMA ourselves to make sure that they are au fait with our structure, the DAO structure itself, what our aim is, our mission, and once we can give them comfort, then we'll go to the next stage, which is the mobilization route. So it is exciting times, and we're looking forward to meeting the FMA in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Mark. And just to clarify, the license will give us access and able to market the bank to those states. The Valhalla Network token itself is separate. Obviously, that marketing the token itself is a whole other sphere. That's not to do with the banking license. Just to avoid any confusion there. No, that's a good sort of overview, Mark, of the FMA and what we're doing with them. This regulator is very forward-thinking, very collaborative. We've heard very good things about them. They've got a very good reputation in the space, which is fantastic to be going into an environment and starting to work with a regulator like that. Now, MiCA doesn't obviously just apply to Liechtenstein, and it's not Liechtenstein bringing it out, MiCA. MiCA's very different. MiCA's, as far as I'm concerned, it's going to cover the whole of Europe, and it'll probably be copied, I imagine, by the US eventually, something similar to MiCA. You've had a lot of experience with MiFID. Now, MiFID, there's been lots of issues with MiFID, which I'm sure you've felt the pain of it for many years. Perhaps you can give some insight into what you think are the challenges going to be with MiCA. So, for example, I understand at the moment that there's different levels that the regulations, when they come in, how they are brought in and how institutions have to then look at them and apply them. So the level 1 is probably the hardest one because it's very generalized and not very specific. So it leaves open some interpretation and trying to figure out what the regulators actually, what regulations actually mean. And then as it becomes more sort of granular, it's easier to work with. You've worked with MiFID. MiFID was a disaster. Looking at MiCA, what do you see the challenges are there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like you say, at the minute it's very, very high level. So all the pain is yet to come, and that will be down the road. This is going to be in the next 18 months because they're going to apply to Valhalla. The date's not been announced, but definitively, but it's likely to be December 2024. So when I say the pain is going to come down the road, that is, like you say, the level 2 rules. This is where the regulator will supplement the directives and regulations with a number of technical measures. So the calibration of these level 2 measures will determine the impact that the rules will have in practice. So you mentioned MiFID II earlier. It was a disaster for many firms, because what happened was there was a lot of subjective analysis as to how you rolled out the regulations. So one of the biggest problems for me when I worked at Arla United was we had transaction reporting that needed to be done. So there was like 65 fields, and the regulator set out the fields that need to be populated, but didn't actually tell you how that was done. So some people pre-populated it incorrectly. They set up various macros. So if you reported on a transaction in amongst these 65 fields, it would go to the regulator, and you might think you've done it correctly, but then you find out retrospectively it's not been done, and then you have to back report. So imagine you're a firm, a tier 1 firm, executing tens of thousands of transactions a day, and you find out that's been done wrong. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I'm going to be making sure that we can leverage that. Look at these technical level 2 rules, and we can reach out to legal counsel where need be. I've got a vast list of contacts myself to make sure that we are doing the right thing. And when they do come back with guidance, we can decipher that and assimilate the rationale as to why we made that decision, why that field should be populated that way, and then we could do things correctly. We're also with the Liechtenstein Association. We can leverage their experience as well. So it's all about working in collaboration with other practitioners to make sure that we do this as best we can, because everyone's going to be in the same boat. Unlike traditional banking, where you've got tier 1 banks, with crypto firms, there isn't. These big players do exist, but it's not the same as in traditional banking. But we're confident. We've done a lot of work so far on doing our baseline position, and now we're ready for this level 2 reporting to come out, so we can actually start building out what the regulator expects of us.
Yeah, I'm hoping with sort of their experience of MiFID and everyone's knowledge of MiFID and the mistakes that were made there, the same mistakes won't be made with MiCA. One can only hope.
Well, exactly, Ollie. And I'm hoping when the guidance does come out, it's more prescriptive rather than leaving things quite vague and ambiguous. Because if that does happen, same mistakes could happen. And when we do see this further guidance, if need be, I'll be working with our practitioners to lobby where we think that granularity is required. Fingers crossed.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree with you, Mark. Look, I appreciate your time today. Audie had to shoot. I know you had to shoot earlier. So the two Marks, thank you as well for your time. We'll wrap up here. Mark can do his usual magic of getting it cut and posted. Mark, enjoy the rest of your house move. I hope it goes well.
Thank you.
And Marco, as always, thanks for joining in live. It's always good to see you here.
Indeed.
Marco's been a supporter right from the start, so it's fantastic that he's here. Very early supporter, and he's always in the Twitter Spaces, I notice. Anyway, all right, thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks
Take care and speak to you soon.
Next time.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye.